Before they were bedtime stories, they were sacred, they were dangerous, and they were remembered for a reason. Before Cinderella, before Brothers Grimm, before even writing had a name, there were stories told by firelight. One was carved into papyrus 3,000 years ago, a story of betrayal and a heart hidden inside a tree. The other was never written. It lived in fire, in metal, in myth. That story is 6,000 years old, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than the wheel. It was never inked onto scrolls, and somehow it's still here. These are the first fairy tales, not the Disney kind, the real ones, just the things we feared and the ways we tried to understand them. You've heard these stories before. You just didn't know how far back they go. This is where fairy tales actually begin. The desert winds have long buried the voices of the ancient world, but sometimes they rise again through fragments of papyrus, etched ink, and a story that refuses to die. This is one of those stories. It comes from Egypt, the New Kingdom, 13th century BC, nearly 3,200 years ago. A time when gods walked among mortals, or so it was believed, when magic and justice were not separate things, when words were symbols and spoken as spells. It was then that a royal scribe took up a reed pen and did something radical. He wrote down a story, not a royal decree, not a hymn to the gods, but a tale, a narrative. This is the earliest known fairy tale ever written down, the first we can still read, the one that marks the beginning of myth becoming manuscript. That tale is now known as the Tale of the Two Brothers. The story begins in a village by the Nile, where two brothers live and work together. Their names are Anpu, the elder, and Bata, the younger. They are close, devoted, strong in body and spirit. They plow the fields. They share the harvest. And for a time, their world is in balance. But like all old stories, the balance is disturbed. Anpu is married. His wife lives in the house with them. And one day, while Anpu is away, she approaches Bata. She desires him, but he refuses her. She tells Anpu that Bata tried to seduce her, and when she rejected him, he struck her. He believes her. Bata is forced to flee. His brother now hunts him, blade in hand, believing the worst. But then, something divine intervenes. Bata cries out to the gods for justice, and they answer. They cause a magical river filled with crocodiles to rise between the two brothers. He tells the truth, and then, to prove his innocence, he severs his own manhood and throws them into the river. A catfish swallows them whole. Anpu is struck by the truth, by shame, and returns home. He ends his wife's life for what she's done. But Bata goes deeper into the wilderness, into destiny. He journeys to the Valley of the Cedars. There, he tells Anpu he will hide his heart in the blossom of a cedar tree. If anything happens to the tree, he says, you'll know. If a jar of beer froths in your hand, come find me. Several years pass. Bata lives in the valley. He builds a new home, and the gods, feeling compassion, create a wife for him from divine essence. Khnum, the ram-headed god who molds life on a potter's wheel, shapes her. She is beautiful, but beauty draws power. Pharaoh hears of her and takes her. Bata's divine wife becomes queen, and at her urging, the pharaoh cuts down the cedar tree, the one holding Bata's hidden heart. Bata dies instantly. Far away, Anpu receives a jar of beer. It froths. He sets out at once, searching for his brother's heart. He searches for 7 years. At last, he finds it. He places it in a bowl of water, and Bata is reborn. Bata transforms into a bull and returns to the palace. His former wife, sensing who he is, asks Pharaoh to slaughter the bull and to give her the liver. Pharaoh agrees. 2 drops of its blood fall on the ground, and 2 Persea trees grow. From within these trees, Bata speaks again. The queen, his wife, begs Pharaoh to cut down the trees and make them into furniture. As they are cut, a splinter flies and lodges in the queen's mouth. She becomes pregnant. She gives birth to a son, who is Bata, reborn again. When Pharaoh dies, this child becomes king, and he names his brother Anpu as heir. The story ends with justice. The false wife is punished. Anpu is reunited with his brother. The tale ends with balance restored, but only after betrayal, mutilation, death, resurrection, shape-shifting, and cosmic justice. If the story feels familiar, it should. Its structure, its symbols have been seen across centuries. A false accusation, like Joseph, betrayed by kin. A hidden heart, like Snow White, whose life is bound to a box. A death and rebirth like Cinderella, cloaked in ashes, rising transformed. But this tale predates them all. This story is an archetype, a template, a ritual encoded in narrative, one that would be passed from culture to culture, masked in new names, new places, new tongues. What does it mean that this was the first tale written down? That the world's oldest written story is about the fragility of trust, the pain of exile, and the mystery of resurrection. Perhaps it means that even 3,200 years ago, we knew the truth that all great stories whisper. It's about what we lose and what we're left with, because sometimes to lose everything is to begin again. In 2016, a group of researchers led by Dr. Jamie Tehrani and Dr. Sara Graça da Silva mapped the genetic lineage of folk tales. Using methods from evolutionary biology, they traced which stories had the deepest roots, and out of 275 tale types, only one reached all the way back to the Proto-Indo-European people, 6,000 years ago, before the Bible, before Babylon, before writing. The oldest fairy tale emerges. That story is
The Smith and the Devil.
The tale begins with a man, a blacksmith, bent over a forge. The air is heavy with smoke. His hammer falls like a drumbeat. He is not a warrior, he is not a priest, but he knows how to shape the world. In the old days, the blacksmith wasn't just a laborer. He was a sorcerer of matter, the only one who could bend the metals of the earth to his will. Metal was magic, but for him, even that wasn't enough. He wanted more, faster forging, stronger blades, tools that never break, power beyond human limitation. But even the most skilled human must eventually face the edge of their own power. And it's at that moment where temptation waits. And one night, something answers him from the dark. Some say it was the devil. Others say it was death. In older versions, it wasn't even named, just a figure that was not of this world. It came from the woods, from the deep places, and it spoke. It offered the blacksmith a deal, power, skill no other man will ever touch. Every blade perfect, every lock broken, every kingdom forged by your hands. All he had to give in return was his soul, and the blacksmith said yes. From that day forward, his forge became legend. Blades that could split trees in silence. Kings and warlords came to him in secret. But when the seasons turned, the shadow returned. The price was due, and the blacksmith refused to pay. Here, the story shifts because it wasn't written, only remembered. And every teller passed it down with a different ending. But in all of them, the blacksmith tricks the dark thing that came to collect. In one telling, he lures the entity into a tree and carves a sacred rune into the bark, trapping it inside. The tree burns in his forge for years, and still you can hear its screams. In another, he convinces it to enter a leather bag to inspect a tool, and when it does, he binds it with unbreakable cord and beats the bag with his hammer until the spirit wails. He melts the bag. The thing within is never seen again. Some say he pinned it beneath his anvil, and that every time his hammer struck, it wasn't metal he was shaping, but punishment. The smith won. But it wasn't a real victory. Not really. Because when he died, heaven refused him. The blacksmith had become too powerful, too independent, and too unruly for any system divine or infernal to control him. Heaven looked down and turned away. This is about hubris, ancient Greek-style defiance of divine order. He used trickery and defied the natural hierarchy by outwitting a cosmic force. Heaven, in myth, often represents order, obedience, harmony. The blacksmith is a breaker of rules. He's not meek, not repentant, not obedient. He didn't humbly submit to the gods. He bent their tools to his will. So even though he defeated evil, heaven says, "You're not one of ours. You don't belong here." And when he turned toward hell, thinking perhaps the devil would welcome him in, the gates did not open. The blacksmith outsmarted the devil. He tricked, trapped, or humiliated the infernal being. In many versions, the devil is still locked in that tree, or sack, or under the anvil because of him. So when the smith dies and knocks on hell's door, they don't want him either. He's unwelcome because he can't be controlled, and so he was cast into neither flame nor light, but into the in-between, a soul unclaimed by either realm, across mountains, across centuries, unwanted by the divine. Some say he still walks, waiting to be accepted by heaven or hell or something older, but the doors remain closed. He is a spirit without a home, a fire without a hearth. Some say if you listen closely, you can still hear the ringing, the sound of his hammer, far off in the distance. This is the story that survived 6,000 years. We think fairy tales are for children, but this one never was. It was made to warn of the cost of power and the price of pride. The story still lives on, in comic books, video games, fables, even urban legends. In any time someone makes a deal for power and tries to escape the price. You've heard this story, even if you don't remember. It's there in Faust, making his bargain with Mephistopheles. In Rumpelstiltskin, demanding something precious in return for a gift. And every time someone made a deal for power and tried to cheat the price, even in the Mississippi Delta, it came back in the shape of a man, with a guitar and a bargain. In the Mississippi Delta, where the blues was born, his name was Robert Johnson, a bluesman, sang with a sound like gravel soaked in fire. And one day, so the legend goes, he disappeared for a little while, long enough to be forgotten. And when he returned, he could play like no one alive. His fingers moved like water. He could make a guitar cry, speak, scream, songs that sounded like they came from the other side. People asked him how he changed, how he came back different, and he said,
I went down to the Crossroads.
He stood at the place where two roads met, just before midnight, and a tall stranger appeared. Not a man, not quite. Some say he was dressed in black. Some say his eyes glowed. Some say he held a guitar of his own. The man tuned Johnson's instrument, handed it back, and in that moment, the bargain was made. Skill for soul. Music for eternity. He became a legend, and he died young, at 27, under mysterious circumstances. His grave is still debated, but his music? It's still here, still haunted, still burning. The names change, the setting shifts, but the shape of the story remains. A man, a deal, a gift that costs more than it gives. But there's something even more similar that happened before the Crossroads. In early accounts, we find the 1587 chapbook Historia von die Johann Fausten, published anonymously in Frankfurt by Johann Spies. In it, Faust is portrayed as a learned man, doctor and scholar, a man who's mastered every discipline of his age, and still wants more. So one night, he calls out. A devil's agent appears before him, whose name was Mephistopheles. Then he makes a pact in exchange for 24 years of superior knowledge, power, and pleasure. In exchange, his soul. From there, the world opens. He masters forbidden languages, studies occult philosophy, commands spirits. In some versions, he conjures Helen of Troy. In others, he travels the world, but the clock keeps ticking. And when the 24 years are up, Mephistopheles returns. In most early versions, Faust is dragged to hell, screaming, torn apart by demons. Then came Goethe. In the early 1800s, German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe rewrote the legend as a two-part epic. Faust is still brilliant, still ambitious, but more philosophical, more conflicted. He's searching for meaning, love, and transcendence. He still makes the deal. He's still guided by Mephistopheles. But Goethe's Faust is offered redemption. By the end of the second part, Faust dies, but he isn't condemned. He's saved, carried upward by angels, because he never stopped striving. So depending on the version, Faust is either a sinner dragged down or a seeker lifted to heaven. But the core of the story never changes. A man makes a deal. He gets everything he ever wanted. And when the price comes due, he either pays it or finds a way out. In 2016, researchers at Durham University used a method called linguistic phylogenetics, essentially evolutionary tree mapping for language. They analyzed hundreds of fairy tale types across Indo-European cultures. Only one story could be reliably dated back 6,000 years: the Smith and the Devil. It shows up in Ireland, Russia, Greece, the Norse world, even in the American Appalachians. Most people don't realize this tale appears in at least 35 distinct Indo-European traditions from Russia to Ireland to India. Which means before pyramids, before Stonehenge, before the wheel was common, people were already telling this story, and somehow it never died. In 1634, Giambattista Basile included a version in L'Occulto degli Conti. The Brothers Grimm recorded it between 1812 and 1815, though they later removed it, favoring stories like Brother Lustig. Versions exist in Russian, Gascon, and Appalachian folklore, where it survives as Wicked John and the Devil. It's found in Polish, Kashubian, and more recently in the Spanish horror film Elementare. At its core is the blacksmith, a symbol of power, danger, and transformation. Forging metal, harnessing fire, half craftsman, half mystic, famous authors have noted how the fires of hell mirror the blacksmith's forge. And phylogenetic analysis suggests metallurgy itself, this power to shape the world, was once seen as supernatural. Some scholars push back and question the tale's Bronze Age origins, noting the Proto-Indo-European language may not have had a word for smith, but historical linguists argue otherwise. The presence of craft-based terms hints at the story's deep antiquity. Versions span Scandinavia, Germany, the British Isles, Ireland, Russia, Appalachia, Gascony, Kashubia, Poland, each reflecting the same core. A deal made for power and the price that follows. This motif never left us. It echoes in modern Faustian bargains, scientists, sorcerers, or inventors who trade everything for one flash of knowledge. These are the first fairy tales. Not about love, not about magic slippers, not about happily ever afters. They're about betrayal, sacrifice, and what we risk when we try to change the world. They weren't made to entertain. They were made to endure. And they did, because they held something true. And somehow, they're still here. Maybe because we need them. Or maybe they were never just stories at all. Let me know, would you make the deal? If you could have anything or everything, would you take it? And if you thought this story was interesting, go check out my video on Rumpelstiltskin and why some say Rumpelstiltskin is the devil. Trust me, it's not what you think. Thanks for watching.